Welcome to the NonProfit Voice, a podcast series brought to you by NonProfit Pro, the go-to resource for nonprofit management and strategy. In each episode, we're going to sit down with leaders of nonprofit organizations, the people responsible for paving the way for our sector, along with key technology strategy partners who are transforming our industry. Here at the NonProfit Voice, we'll have refreshing conversations in which we will all learn more about the convergence of nonprofit and technology. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website to find more episodes of the NonProfit Voice. And you can download all of the NonProfit Voice episodes on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify. We will have all the links down below. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the NonProfit Voice. I am happy to be here, and I hope you are too. My name is Nhu Te, and I will be your host for today's episode. As we're gearing up to end 2019 and welcome 2020, I hope everybody is having a super successful year-end season. And seeing as this is going to be our last podcast episode of the NonProfit Voice for 2019, I knew I had to end it with a bang. So today I have two very special guests joining me in our talk. Everyone, please welcome Joel Kalinowski, Director of Website Strategy for Save the Children, and Salvatore Salpietro, CIO of Fundraise Up. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I'm super jazzed to have you both here. How are you both doing?
Doing great.
Excellent here. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. So I don't know where you guys are right now, but is it cold where you are? Are you enjoying it?
I am in Connecticut, and Sal is it Brooklyn, Sal?
Yeah, in Brooklyn. That's right.
Okay. So we're not too far apart, and it's chilly, but it's pretty well due at this point in the year.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same here in Philly. All right, cool. So let's just dive into today's topic. So in episode number 8, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite or least favorite topic, depending who you are and what your job role is at your organization: data and analytics. So this is definitely something that people either love or hate, but for me personally, I think that everyone can benefit from loving it because understanding the data can help you immensely. Seriously, more than you can imagine. And today we're going to dive into all different bits of it, from data collection, metrics, to AI and predictive analytics. But before we dive in, I want to take a few minutes for our audience to get to know both of you a little bit more. So Joel, share your background in the philanthropic sector with us.
Sure. So I've been with Save the Children since January, and prior to that, I had been on a board of a local nonprofit for about 3 years. During that period, I was actually doing some pretty extensive coursework in graduate school on nonprofit management and marketing. The rest of my experience is really from the for-profit sector, but I think, especially as we dive into some of these data conversations, you'll see me talk a lot that there's a lot of similarities. I mean, when we talk about our services, there are differences, but the actual way that the digital experience happens, there's a lot of similarities.
Super cool. And Sal, how about you?
Yeah, similarly, I came from, I guess historically, the for-profit sector for the last 10 years or so, involved in tech startups and software for that space. But after this, I spent a couple years, just over two and a half years, as digital director at the Child Mind Institute, which is a national nonprofit for children's mental health. And that's where I learned a lot of the specific struggles and holes that nonprofits have in their data and tech. So this particular theme of our conversation today is particularly interesting. Now I'm CIO at Fundraise Up, which is a data-centric online giving platform.
Awesome. So it seems like you guys both have experience in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. So I think today's topic is going to be a really fun one. Okay, so just like to jump into it and kind of like start at the base level. Joel, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. In our digitally powered world, what role does data play in the nonprofit sector?
Sure. Going back to what I was talking about before about the similarities between nonprofit and for-profit, one example that I can give you is, let's take subscription models. We in the for-profit sector, you have companies like Birchbox or Stitch Fix, and while they have a physical product and we have more of a service, but we do have the reoccurring donation model, and that makes it very similar from the digital experience. Because it is similar in the digital experience, that means that the data that we're getting out of that experience are very similar. And from all of that, really, the important point is the role of data in our sector is just like every other sector. It's like the foundation of all the business decisions that we're going to be making now and in the future.
Yeah, that I think, Joel, you're coming from Save the Children. I think you see a lot more of that, and maybe in your particular practice prior. Having worked with a couple of nonprofits that are that small, medium size, my answer for this is, for most organizations, it doesn't have enough of a role. These mega orgs like Save the Children, where you're at, it's a huge role. But the technology that's typically available to nonprofits in general, from my experience, is 5 years behind what is in the for-profit or e-commerce space, the platforms that they have available. But understandably, most nonprofits don't have the staff, expertise, or funds to really invest in data analytics and all of that software, and the people that know this stuff, which is why I think using the tools and platforms that do a lot of this for you are becoming more important. There's a few that come to mind in the nonprofit space. We can probably talk about a few later, but probably not the ones everyone would think.
Yeah, definitely. It's a no-brainer that data is such an important aspect of a nonprofit and should be recognized as so. But the problem is, I read so many studies that say nonprofits aren't even looking at the data, and nonprofits aren't making data-driven decisions, which is, for me, a problem.
Agree.
So with that said, nonprofits need to collect data. It's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
And while all the nonprofits probably have access to data, less than half of nonprofits understand how data is being collected, and even less than that use data to make data-informed decisions. So what's the disconnect here, and how can we solve this problem? Sal, you work a lot with different types of nonprofits at Fundraise Up. Can you address this?
Yeah, I mean, every single thing that we're using is collecting data, tons of data. Let's use the most basic of all things that do this, Google Analytics. Probably every nonprofit has a website, and they're using Google Analytics to track their website visitors. But they're doing way more than just website visitors. They're collecting the affinity, purchasing habits, behavior habits of all of your different audiences and visitors, and they're serving ads based on this. So that's to say that most of this data is available to the organization in some capacity. Sometimes there's too much data that the organization doesn't really know where to start. But I usually suggest this approach, and I use this myself. I'll write down a list of questions that data can answer, right? So it's data, not opinions, not ego, not what someone heard, numbers. For example, how much of our web traffic is on mobile devices, right? Or what's the median donation value for one-time gifts versus recurring gifts? These are numbers, these are facts, and we can then make decisions based on this. So let's use the mobile traffic example, right? If 20, 30, 40% of your audience is on a mobile device and your donation forms are not mobile responsive, you're literally losing out on 20, 30, or 40% of your visitor revenue. What's the related action that you can take based on data? Find things that work for mobile visitors. So this is just one example. These are faux pas that an e-commerce or for-profit entity would never make. They would be looking at that, and I think it's important for nonprofits to realize the importance of these things just as much. Everyone has a paycheck they need to get, and every organization has a mission that they're trying to accomplish, and these can make severe changes to that. For example, Fundraise Up is a mobile-friendly donation process. Add This by Oracle. It's a great tool that I recommend to organizations for social sharing on your website. Both have no hard costs associated with them. They give you tons of data, lots of instant results, and you can make decisions based on the stuff that they report.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Sal. The thing that I would add is there's a big disconnect between how professionals are entering the workforce from college or even as early as high school. And, unless you study in a data intensive program like computer science or statistics, you don't find many college programs are actually teaching people how to look at or use data. So even though we're saying, people have access to it, there's all these tools that they can use to get some of that data. They're just not able to take it beyond the cursory look of, okay, there's a number and I know how to read that number. I don't know that there's an easy fix to that, because certainly the three of us are not going to be able to go into the university system and fix how they're teaching data, especially because it's changing so rapidly. By the time they graduate, it'll be different from the time that they took their first class in school. Mm-hmm. But I do think, especially when you're thinking about young professionals, taking a combination approach of external training when it's available and on-the-job projects to really dive in and learn how to interpret data is what's going to take them from the level of cursory reports to really understanding how to action that data.
Sure, 100%. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I'll just throw in there, Google Analytics, for example, there's some free training that Google offers for some certificates and things like that, so people can feel more confident.
Yeah, definitely. And, along the same vein here, when it comes to interpreting that data, Joel, a big challenge is the volume of data nonprofits have access to. And, what metrics do you look at? Like, there's so many. So do you have any pointers for nonprofits who are, not really sure on which metrics to focus on? And, please do share examples of metrics that Save the Children has used.
Sure. I think that, to Sal's point earlier, there's a lot of data that's happening in our organization. We're very data centric. So what I think is important for most organizations, depending on the size, is that they're consistent in what they're looking at. So if you're looking at a handful of metrics or a metric set in 1 month, look at the same metric set in the next month and track that over time, because otherwise you're in danger of looking at the metrics that look best for what you're trying to look at. Some of the ones that I look at religiously myself and I recommend to other organizations is traffic, conversion rate, average gift, your product mix. So the difference between your one-time, your reoccurring, and any other product types that you have. And then also your lifetime value, that's really a combination metric where you're going to get that from some of your analytics packages, but then you also need to marry that with what you know from your donor data outside. The other piece of advice that I'd give there is that you can't really look at any metric in isolation. So let's just take one example from what we were talking about before of we're monitoring traffic. And in month one, you see that, in month two, you see that traffic went up over month one, and you think, hey, that's great, our traffic's up. But then when you look at it with the conversion rate, you say, oh, wow, conversion rate has dropped. And obviously that's not good, because that means that you're not getting more revenue from the increase in traffic. And what that does is that now triggers you to do a deeper dive and see what's happening. But having those base metrics, or 5 or 6 that I were talking about, really help flag for you when there's an issue that you need to dive into further.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you're saying about keeping it in context. This reminds me of one time there at Child Mind Institute, we saw time on site dropping, but we saw our mobile traffic increasing dramatically and our overall web traffic. Obviously, a user spends less time on a web page when they're on a mobile device than when they're on a desktop, and hence the reduced time on site. So that's okay in that case, or in some cases you might be able to, like you said, justify or see it through a different lens. Conversion rate's what I look at all day. That's what you mentioned as well. This is what tells you how effective you are at basically converting a visitor to a donor, or an ad to a social media follower, and so on and so forth. So you can really, by making small changes, improve these conversion rates and make big differences across the board for your social media growth, engagement. It's the single most valuable piece of data that you can look at, in my opinion. That and year-on-year growth. Year-on-year growth always brings to mind this old joke that I was told it was an old joke. I don't know that it's an old joke, because I'm not that old, but it's that nonprofits target to do at least 90% next year of what they did the year prior, right? So it's kind of let's just do enough to not raise too many eyebrows. But we should aim to change that. Try to do 20% better than the year before across any metrics.
No, I think that's definitely, there's a truth to that nonprofits, at least these days, that they're just aiming to remain flat year after year. They don't want donations to decline. They don't want their donor retention to decline. but they should aim a little higher than the year before. So,
Sure.
to help maintain that steady growth year over year, to make sure that, they're progressing and they're not falling behind.
And it's not that difficult. Data can help them do it.
Exactly.
Data can save you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree that data can save them. I also think one of the metrics you were talking about triggered this for me, which is that, data also isn't always straightforward, especially with some of the analytics packages. So let's take time on site, for example. In the example you were using, increase or decrease in time on site. And I often hear this from nonprofits, for-profits when I was doing consulting. They're like, oh, our time on site went up. This is great. More people are spending time on our website. And when you dig a little bit deeper into that, you have to put some of your own institutional knowledge into that and say, okay, I'm looking at your site. It's not a content-based site, so there's not content that people are spending more time digesting. It's really just products. And suddenly, your time on site goes up 10 or 20%. What are some of the changes that you made? And then further analysis sort of shows that people are not finding what they're looking for in the same way they were before. So something like a Google Analytics, I think, will tell you, oh, time on site, it'll make that number green and say like the time on site is up because, that's better when more people spend time on your site, but that's not always the case. So numbers like that can be really, really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Joel. I think you need to look at more than one metric to learn about the behaviors of what you're looking at and how donors are responding to it. Okay, so we can't have this topic without talking about, the shiny new thing that's happening in the nonprofit space, and the thing that all the cool kids are talking about, which is artificial intelligence. That's all we're hearing these days. Joe, I'd love, for you to kick this one off. Can you share how nonprofits can use it for fundraising and for other things beyond fundraising?
Sure. I think, to your point about it being shiny and new, artificial intelligence is really a quite broad term and can mean different things to different people depending on what definition you're using. In fact, I actually hear it misused pretty often because of the way that it's, reported on by the media. I think what we're most interested here is really a subset of artificial intelligence called machine learning. And that's simply where the machine or the computer and its software, if you want to get, really granular there, uses models and algorithms to analyze data and then be able to make predictions based on information that it already knows to be true or in certain cases probable. And it's the predictive nature of that AI or machine learning that we're most interested for nonprofits, because we want to be able to look at what past donors have done and be able to apply that into a predictive model of what future donors will be able to do. So using an example again, let's say both of you are website visitors. Now, Sal has donated to me 3 times. I know 15 pieces of information about Sal in our database. And then externally, we know another couple hundred that are available through third-party data. Now, Nhu, you come to our site, you're the first time, we don't know anything about you from our data, but with those external third-party systems, we can see that you strongly match Sal. And so that allows us to be able to do things like, interpret what you are going to donate to, what products you're going to be most interested in. And I think, Sal, I'm going to push it over to you because this is exactly how the two of us met and, what Fundraise Up's entire business is about.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm a bit in sometimes a bit in like a rabbit hole with this. I'm always on the AI applying to online giving. Maybe you've given some thought to other parts of the organization and nonprofits in general. But yeah, my day-to-day involves applying AI directly to the online giving space. Examples are like what you said, making predictive guesses on revenue data points to ask them, right? So how much are you going to ask that they give? We can predict how much they would have given and ask for more based on things like location, device type, frequency to this website, time of day, time of the year, so on and so forth. So even if we know something about you or nothing about you, we can take external data points and draw some conclusions. So we can say, okay, the average donor gives $20. And this is your first time to the website. We don't know if you're able to give more, but we know that you live in Upper West Side Manhattan, where there's a higher household income. So maybe we're not going to ask you for 20, we're going to ask you for 30. So things like this is, I agree with Joel. It's machine learning more than AI. AI is doing things that simulate humans, whereas with machine learning, we're drawing mathematical calculations and probability based on data points. But it's incredibly useful. So, AI is starting to sound jargony in the industry, but it's real. It's making a difference. As long as it's used properly and not a long road to a simple answer, it can make a huge impact.
Absolutely. And I also think that most nonprofits, ourselves included, even large nonprofits, are not in a position to be able to hire or even actually find, but let alone hire AI developers and programmers who are going to be able to design and implement this kind of technology for us. At least not anywhere in the near future. There's just, it's expensive, and that skill set is not prevalent in industry at this moment. So the way that we're going to be able to use that in fundraising is to be able to find and attach ourselves to vendors like Fundraise Up, who are using those predictive models within their own tool and then attaching that to our fundraising process.
Awesome. I'm so intrigued by the predictive nature of it, and I think that you guys have set the stage so perfectly for our next topic, which is predictive analytics. And I'm going to ask you a really loaded question because, predictive analytics sounds like a tool that every nonprofit needs. And I was wondering, Sal, if you could kick this off and share your thoughts behind this particular type of modeling, give some background information on it, how it works, and talk about the pros and the cons.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a two-edged sword, really, right? Dido, data in, data out. It's going to be as good coming out as what you feed the machine. So if you only give certain parts of the picture to the machine, your predictive analytics and your predictive modeling is going to be pretty weak. Give it more data, which takes more time, more effort, more thinking, more thought in general, and you'll get a stronger picture. So I think the pros are, obviously, it can make huge inroads in what your ask is for your wealthier donors when you're doing your corporate philanthropy and so on. But the con can be that it can also guide you in the wrong direction if you don't give it enough information.
Yeah, there's an old database phrase that I'm going to paraphrase for the purposes of being on the podcast, which is, junk in, junk out. And it goes back to like when we were first creating databases, and you found that like reports were really great and really useful, but only if the information that was going into the database in the first place was correct and accurate. Mm-hmm. And we're at a much larger scale now with predictive analytics about that. But basically, with the data points that Sal's talking about, we can only predict what we know. And if we're trying to predict off of the incorrect information, that's the wrong prediction. We're not looking for that. So that would be a huge con on how we can't use predictive analytics.
Yeah, I think I'd say the simpler your question is that you're trying to answer, the fewer data points you can get away with feeding into your predictive modeling. Is that fair, Joel?
Yeah, I think so. I guess it also, again, if as long as that information is accurate, then you can trust it. And trust is probably an important factor in what we're talking about here. So I use the term junk in, junk out, but you're sort of talking about the lower data points. And if you have full trust that data is accurate and actionable, then absolutely.
It's awesome. Yeah, I love how you guys really focus on how you have to put good data in order to get good data out. And I think that the way that I've seen it, the predictive analytics be explained, it just seems so easy, like why doesn't every nonprofit implement this into their strategy? It's like no big deal. But on the larger scale of things, you have to make sure you're putting in a good amount of effort, making sure that all the data is correct and accurate, and also putting in the right data in order for this to work.
One thing to add to that too is when we think about what it would take for us to be able to do that prediction versus the machine or the computers, it's sort of astronomical. And Sal touched on it earlier about human bias. So there's the human bias factor. If I'm looking at information and I think, let's take an experiment in this example, and we say this page I love, it's beautiful, it's new design, and I just love everything about it. And I'm testing it against the old page, which is ugly and outdated, and I hate everything about it. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I start to analyze that data and predict which one of those is going to win? I am already biased for the page that I like. And that's a really, really simplified example. I think that can happen on a much larger scale. But even if I could remove bias, I would love to be able to look at all the data that's available and predict what's going to happen. So in the example we were talking about before, if you both were donors, Nhu, you're a new donor coming in, Sal, you've been a donor before, I can look at all that data and say, okay, I can predict that Sal is most likely to do X, Y, or Z, but then how do I actually apply that to Nhu coming into the website? I can't, and I certainly can't do it in the real-time fashion that artificial intelligence and machine learning are enabling us to do today.
That's great stuff. I love it. Okay, so this is always a question that I ask our guests when they're on because I think it's really fun and I love all the different kinds of answers I get. Sal, if you had one piece of advice for nonprofits, what would it be?
Because I hate endless meetings. My number one tip would say, look at your data, let it answer questions before you call a meeting to get everyone's consensus or opinion on it. Go to the meetings with data. It'll shorten the meeting. You'll get a better result.
I love that.
That's what I got.
I also hate long meetings too.
I don't know. I love long meetings.
You must be an extrovert.
I agree with Sal. I think, data should be the foundation of all your decisions. The thing that I will add on to that for my advice, which is that data really doesn't work alone. So, you can spit out a report from one of these analytics packages or any of the programs that you're using, but beyond the metric itself, it's not going to tell you the story. It's not going to tell you what the decision is that you need to make. It's not going to give you the full picture. And that's why you really need the human aspect of it to extract those insights. Otherwise, you're just looking at numbers. And I think groups, especially the bigger they get and the longer the meetings get, the more in danger you are of getting in that analysis paralysis, of looking at all this different data and never actually coming out with something that's actionable.
Love it. All right, so that about wraps it up for today's episode. I want to thank our listeners for listening on today's podcast. Joel and Sal, it's been such a pleasure and I had so much fun on today's episode. Thank you so much again for joining us on the Nonprofit Voice and sharing your insights and expertise on data and analytics.
Same here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So on behalf of Nonprofit Pro, we will see you on the next episode of the Nonprofit Voice. Have a great day.